guys, what's up? So today I'm going to be talking about my experience getting diagnosed with dysautonomia, what it is, and what other syndromes, disorders, and problems I have that have come along with it or correlate to it. So first, for those of you who don't know, dysautonomia is a malfunction of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is systemically every system in your body. So an example of a system would be your brain is part of your neurologic system. Your stomach is part of your gastrointestinal system. Your heart is part of your cardiovascular system. Dysautonomia also affects your adrenal glands and your sweat glands. It can also impact you psychologically and give you a lot of anxiety. So to give you a little bit of background about me and getting my diagnosis, I spent 5 years searching for a diagnosis and going to every single specialist for every single problem and ruling out everything one by one by one. This was exhausting. I've been sick my entire life, but I didn't start to get really uncontrollably sick until I was 14. For me, it started with stomach issues, and it made its way to blacking out, shaking, maybe seizures, we don't really know what they are, and a whole lot of other things. So after spending years and years and years and years and years on end trying to figure out what it is, going to every single specialist, and what I mean by that is I would pass out. So then I would go to a heart doctor, which is a cardiologist, or a neurologist, and with my stomach issues, I'd go to a gastroenterologist, and nobody could piece it all together. They would work with one system at a time, and then slowly things started to present themselves, which indicated that there was a systemic problem. For me, what really showed that things were systemic was my back. So I have scoliosis from my neck to my butt with 3 additional back injuries and a hernia somewhere else. And all those issues, when I went to physical therapy, he realized how weak I was and how I had no muscle mass. And this was the first indication that, hey, it's wrong everywhere. 3 days after I turned 18, I met with a cardiologist who's verified through Dysautonomia International, which is a website and organization that works for research to figure out what causes dysautonomia. And they're just a really helpful and insightful site that lists a whole bunch of doctors on there who actually work and treat and diagnose it. In that appointment, I showed up in a wheelchair because back then, I really could not live without it. I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user, so I don't always need a wheelchair, but sometimes I really do need it depending on the pain and the weakness of that day. So I showed up at that visit, and this doctor pulled up my cardiologist records from the last cardiologist that's affiliated with this place. It was right then and there that he realized that the Holter monitor, or heart monitor, that I was on the previous year, the results had been too high the entire time. He also did a Baton criteria test, which shows the signs of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It was right then and there he diagnosed me with pretty critical EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobility type 3, which I ended up finding out for sure was type 3 after going to a geneticist and getting all the other genetic mutation types ruled out, which that's a whole other thing in itself, which I can make a whole other separate video on. So he put me on another heart monitor, and then he got those results and realized everything was way too high. Then we scheduled the tilt table test where I laid down on a table and he put me into different postural positions, monitoring my blood pressure and my heart rate. I lasted 71 seconds on the tilt table when it tilted upward for me to be standing on the table before oxygen started declining to my brain and my heart rate went up significantly. This is when it proved that I have hyperhidronic POTS. POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is essentially your vitals cannot regulate, which forms your blood pressure to drop or your heart rate to go up 30 beats higher than it should. So after seeing this guy, I found out that I had POTS and EDS. It was time to start looking in other directions because I have a lot of symptoms that go with mast cell activation syndrome. I found an allergist and immunologist, and I went there for testing. I did a 24-hour urine and a tryptase blood test. My tryptase came back okay, but my 24-hour urine showed that I had extra histamine that shouldn't be in there. I tested positive for mast cell activation syndrome. The cardiologist who diagnosed the POTS and the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome started to treat me. He put me on a heart medication, called metroprenol, which I didn't end up taking, and I went to a separate neurologist to put me on propranolol, which is what I actually take, which is a beta blocker, and it slows your heart rate down. With that being said, it also drops your blood pressure, so you have to be careful if you already have low blood pressure to begin with. I do, so I'm on a very low dose of propranolol. All these symptoms are really crazy, and I just want to talk about a little bit about what I go through and why it's so debilitating for me and why I can't do anything. But my number one problem is my stomach. My mast cells affect my stomach. I have allergic reactions. Mast cell activation syndrome is essentially your cells in your body malfunctioning and going havoc. When I eat something that has a high amount of histamine inside of it, which I already have inside my body, my mast cells will pellet out. So I'm allergic to basically every single food, which makes it really, really, really hard to eat. I also have the signs and symptoms of early gastroparesis, which I have not gone for the gastric emptying test, but I will probably early next year. Another thing I have is rapid shaking and tremor. So I will lock up and I will start shaking, which appears as seizures that comes along with confusion, being out of breath, and just hurting really bad afterwards. I also frequently almost black out. It's like this little hazy phase when I go to stand up, when I get really dizzy and I lose my vision, and that's related to my POTS. As well as occasionally I will actually black out. And a lot of things trigger these episodes, such as fluorescent lights, going out, certain sounds, certain movements, so it's really hard to be in a normal setting. But for those of you who were curious about what dysautonomia is, I hope that this kind of helped you figure out, okay, that maybe this is how I need to go about to see if I have this and get diagnosed with it. So I would recommend that you see a cardiologist who is educated in it and go to dysautonomiainternational.org to make sure that they work with dysautonomia and can diagnose it and treat it. But if you don't have that in your area, then I recommend you go to a cardiologist or a neurologist can treat this disorder. For Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I really recommend that you go that way as well. Those people that treat POTS, like 85–90% of the time, POTS comes with EDS, so really, those doctors are going to be the ones to guide you in the right direction. I'm popping in while editing this video to say that if you have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or you're looking for an Ehlers-Danlos syndrome diagnosis, another thing you can do is go to Ehlers-Danlos Society, which is another organization like Dysautonomia International, mainly for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it's really helpful. They have a whole other list of doctors on their website. So I'm going to link those two websites in the description of this video so you guys can easily access it to find a doctor if you're interested. Rheumatology has not helped me, so I will not really recommend going there. Another place you can go for EDS is genetic specialists. Genetic specialists can then run the EDS test to rule out the other types of EDS to make sure it's not more critical and it's strictly hypermobile. For mast cell activation syndrome, you could go see an allergist or immunologist. You really want to try to find somebody who's educated in mast cell, so when you go to look up a doctor, make sure that you put that in to what you're looking for. I really hope that this helps some of you that are lost and maybe trying to find a diagnosis. However, if you already have one and you want to know how I deal with my dysautonomia, my POTS, my EDS, my mast cell, I will have videos coming about that, all the products I use, the medications that I take, and basically everything that helps me. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys are doing okay and everything's great, and yeah, bye guys.